Welcome everyone. We're into a brand new portion of the Torah, which actually begins a section that's going to continue for the next few weeks that relates to the building of the Mishkan, the sanctuary that Hashem commanded us to build in the desert. Fascinating, different implements and vessels, and exactly described how they had to be created and from what material. And we learn all of these intricate details. And please God, may Hashem restore the temple with the coming of Mashiach, where many of these implements will once again be needed. But for us who don't actually have a need for the physical menorah that stood in the temple, there's so much that can be derived that gives instruction for the way we conduct our lives. So let's try and visit some of them. We always begin with a summary. So let's begin with a summary of the portion of Teruma. Hashem instructs Moshe Rabbeinu, let them make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell amongst them. We'll come back to that usage of words. I will dwell amongst them. But Hashem wanted the Jewish people to create a sanctuary where Hashem would live. The title we gave to that shir is how to make Hashem feel at home in our lives, because we live our lives, and are our lives and the way we conduct ourselves conducive to God feeling at home in our lives? Do we do the things that make Hashem have nachas? And are we fulfilling Hashem's mission? Now, there were many materials that we needed. They included precious metals, gold, silver, copper, dyed wools and hides and flax and wood, olive oil, spices and gems, many physical varieties of wealth and items of the physical were used to fulfill Hashem's mission. The ark was made of gold plated acacia wood. So inside, the actual walls of the sanctuary of the ark were made out of wood, but each panel of wood, each side of the wood was covered by gold on the inside of it and gold on the outside of it. And then there were rings in the corners that housed transportation poles. That's going to become and I'm going to show pictures soon. Those were the poles with which they carried the ark from one place to another. So they had a ring on the side and a pole that went through those rings, and then people would lift up the poles, and with that they would lift up the whole ark when they transported from one place to another. The ark was to be covered with a slab of pure gold with two protruding cherubs. These were figurines, one of a boy and one of a girl, children, and they were made of pure gold. Full stop. So that's one major item. The ark that housed, amongst other things, the tablets. The first tablets, the pieces of the broken first tablets, and then the second tablets. There were also a few other items that were placed in them. Then there was a table, and the table wasn't a regular eating table. It was a showbread table that was built up into the sky, into the above. It went up, and there were 12 shelves, 6 and 6, on which this oddly shaped breads that had a bottom and then two sides protruding upwards, and they were placed on these pans that were on the shelves of the table, 12 of them, 12 shelves, 6 and 6. And those showbreads were placed there on Friday, and they miraculously stayed fresh all the way till the next Friday, and then they were taken out and shared by the Kohanim that were in service. That too was gold-plated acacia wood. It was made of wood, but there was gold on the inside and outside, and there were rings housed to transport the table when they had to move from one place to another. We'll soon see pictures. Then there was a 7-branched menorah. And this menorah was beaten out of a single block of pure gold. It was not limbs, branches that were welded on to a central core, which would be the natural way to build a menorah. No, it was one piece of gold that was beaten, and protrusions from that block of gold were created by beating the gold and allowing the protrusions to come. So it actually came from one piece of gold, nothing was attached. It actually was created in a very complicated way. It would have been much easier if the end result just needed to be made to do it as an artisan today would do it, which would be to weld different pieces together. But there was a very specific reason that it had to be done through a complicated procedure of beating a pure singular block of gold. And there were many decorative cups and knobs and flowers on the body of this menorah. I'll show you a picture in a moment. Then there was to be a covering for the sanctuary, which was to consist of several layers of tapestry. We'll see pictures of that as well. The first layer was to be a woven mixture of dyed wools and linen. The second layer was to be made of goat's hair, that was black. And then these two oversized coverings also covered the outside of the Mishkan walls. I will show you a picture to demonstrate that. And the very top of the Mishkan was then to be further covered by dyed ram skins and tachash hides. Tachash was a type of exotic animal. The hides of that were placed just on the roof of the sanctuary. The other two coverings, the first covering number 1 and number 2, covered the top of the sanctuary and then draped down the sides of the sanctuary and even extended onto to covering a part of the ground that was around the sanctuary. But the third covering was made of these tachash hides, very exotic hides, and they just covered the very top, the roof of the sanctuary. The walls of the Mishkan was to be made of upright beams placed one alongside the other, and they were also gold-plated acacia wood. This is the third thing that we're referring to that was made of gold-plated acacia wood. The ark so far, the table with the showbreads. Now we're talking about the actual beams that formed the walls of the sanctuary. The menorah that we mentioned was pure gold, no wood. Now, the bottom of each beam had 2 projections. We'll come back to each of these as we're looking at the pictures, and they were to be inserted into 2 silver sockets. And that was the ground. So when you looked at the beam, you saw the bottom section was covered in silver, and then it was gold, but in the inside of that gold was wood, acacia wood. The Mishkan's front side to the east was to have no wall, but there were beams, and you would walk into the Mishkan through the beams. That was an entranceway. Its northern and southern side was to have 20 beams each. Its western wall was to have 8. Okay, complicated to remember, but we're going to look at the pictures now. The inside of the sanctuary was 30 cubits, approximately 15 meters by 10 cubits, and 10 cubits high. The beams were held together by several processes of crossbars that held the beams, these upright beams standing alongside one another to form the walls of the sanctuary. There were beams that went through and alongside it to hold them in place as they stood up. I'll show you pictures now. And then the ark was placed in the innermost chamber, which was the holies of holies. The outer holy chamber housed the menorah and the table. There is one other thing that it housed that we're not reading about this week, and we'll only strangely read about it next week. And then there were curtains of woven of dyed wools and linen that were placed between the holies of holies and the rest of the holy sanctuary, and also on the eastern entrance to the Mishkan. The outside altar was made of copper-plated acacia wood. So this is the first item that's not made of gold. It was made of copper. This is outside the actual holies and holies of holies. This copper altar was made to bring the various sacrifices. It had 4 protruding horns and rings as well for transportation. Then there was the courtyard. The Mishkan courtyard was 100 cubits times 50 cubits, much, much wider. It was enclosed by mesh linen curtains, and a curtain woven of dye wools and linen covered the courtyard's entrance on the east side. I'm going to go through some pictures and we'll refer back to some of these summaries. So here you have a picture where you have the outside altar. That's the last thing we're dealing with. It was made of copper-coated acacia wood. There was a ramp that went up the side of it. There were horns, as we said, protruding in each corner of it. And when the Kohen walked up the ramp and stood on the top, he was able to bring a sacrifice or burn the sacrifices that were brought. And then these things on the side were the rings that had crossbeams going through it, which were able to transport the outside altar. Here you have the sanctuary made up of the first section is the holies. We'll see an inside section. And the last section at the back was the holies of holies. You entered from the east and you walked westwards. The very back of the holies of holies was on the west side. Similar to today, when we stand at the western wall, we are standing at the kotel. This is a sanctuary in the desert. Then was the temple built on the same, similar proportions and similar items inside of it, but always the west side was in fact the closest point outside of the sanctuary to the holies of holies, because we stand at the kotel on the west side of the temple. That's what's called the western wall. And this is the courtyard we spoke about. We said that there were linen curtains that were woven that formed the outside walls of the courtyard that housed the altar and then the sanctuary. So moving on to see more specific pictures, we spoke about the ark. And the ark was made of acacia wood. I'm pointing to it right now. So there were actually 3 boxes. It was a box made of wood that was placed into a box made of gold. And then a box made of gold, with exactly the right proportions, was placed inside the box made of wood. So you actually had a sandwich. By the time it was dropped into place, this wood was coated on the outside with gold and on the inside, because there were boxes that fitted flush with the outside of the box and with the inside of the box. And then the rim of the wood over here was also covered in gold. Then on top of that was placed this pure gold plate, no wood. And it had 2 figurines, one of a male and a woman, two children, a boy and a girl. And we'll get back to that point as well. And this was beaten out of one singular piece of gold, like we're going to speak about in the menorah. It was not a plate that you welded onto it, a figurine, and then you welded another figurine, and then you welded on the wings. No, this was all beaten out of one piece of gold, that would be beaten so that these protrusion extended upwards, and then they were fashioned into the specific details of the figurines. These are the poles that stood alongside the ark. Interesting, what's unique about the ark is that they never took them away. They never took them out. So if the ark was standing in a single place for a day, because sometimes in the 40 years through the desert, they set up the sanctuary for a single day. They didn't know. They set it up, and then God came at the end of the day and he lifted the cloud and they said, oops, dismantle, take it all down, let's start over. And then they would go on the road, and then they would pitch tent the next night, and they would set everything up with great attention to detail. And they could maybe stay there for many years. The 40 years in the desert was not divided equally in the journeys, the 42 journeys they did through the desert. Sometimes they stayed for years, and sometimes they stayed just for a day. So you see that this box is gold, that's wood, that's gold. Okay, that is the first item that we spoke about, the ark. Here we're speaking about the table. This is a table made of wood coated in gold. There's the table again. It had a zeir zahav, it had a gold railing that went around it, almost like a crown that went around it. A very elaborate gold beautifying crown that went around the table. And from these tables, there was almost step ladders that went up with cross beams, and they were then supports. I hope there is a picture of the table in place. No, it doesn't look like it. Maybe we'll find one soon. So if you can picture these step ladders going up from the top of the table, extending upwards, a series of them, and then there were plates or shelves that connected from one of these step ladders to the next, and on those plates were placed a very specifically shaped pan that contained the bread that, as I said, had a floor and then 2 sides that extended upwards. So that's access to the table. Here we're talking about the menorah. Interesting, many of our menorahs are round shaped, like we have at the Great Park, in the shul in the front, we have round menorahs. The Rambam very specifically draws the diagram as straight arms, even described as ba'alachson. They went at a slant, at an angle from the central core. And as you can see, there are knobs and flowers numbered and specifically given. There were cups, look at the cups over here, that were ornamental. And then look how, there's a whole subject in a later portion, how the lamps on top of the menorah were so placed so that the flame always was to the inside of the cup, inside, then you got the middle flame, and then from the other side was always on the inside. So they were 7 different branches with 7 different flames, but the flames all extended inwards towards the central beam, and there were 7 altogether. So that's the menorah. We said no beams were welded on. This was not made as we would make any implement today, simply weld on pieces, create the form and then weld it on. No, it was formed out of 1 block of gold that was beaten and beaten until you had the protrusions and the arms that formed the menorah. We spoke about the coverings of the sanctuary and that there were 3 of them. So we had very intricate tapestries. That was the first cover, and it didn't just cover the roof, it hung down the sides of the walls of the sanctuary as well. The one on top of that, 2, that was made of goat hairs, black goat hairs, and the 3rd covering, which was out of this exotic tachash animal hide, only covered the top, so it didn't droop down the sides. There were panels of these. Each one of these coverings was not one long covering, it was made of strips that were then hooked together next to one another to form the entire cover. Very intricately described. Here we got the beams of the sides of the sanctuary. There were upright beams. We said at the bottom there were 2 protruding feet out of each beam, into which they were placed into each one of these beams into a silver socket. And then this wood beam was coated in gold. So when you looked at it from the side, you would actually see silver at the bottom, and then you would have the rest of the beam sticking up. So it would stand in these silver sockets. These were not joining them to the next. They were just a base, a foundation base. Then there were different elements that joined each beam to the next, each gold-coated beam to the next. Here you got one system where the brackets went into a slit on the one beam and into a slit of the other beam, and that bracket held them together on the top. There was also a very intricate set of beams that went across all of these beams that were able to hold the beams together. Look here, you got the upright. Let's try and get it again. You got brackets on the sides of the beams, and then a beam went through all of these brackets so that you had a whole lot of singular upright beams, and then a cross beam that went all the way across to hold these beams together. Maybe there's a better picture coming up. That's just the dimensions of the courtyard. Over here, we're seeing that on the east side, you had not complete walls, but you had beams and a curtain, like we call a parochet, the curtain that hangs on front of our ark in the shul. There was a curtain that divided it right in the front as you went into the holies, and then between the holies and the holies of holies, where the ark stood, began another curtain, partition. And then we said there was a outer altar. It was made of copper. This is not gold, this is copper. There was a ramp that was placed next to it so that the Kohen could walk along a long ramp. Stand at the top, there were 4 horns in the corners of the top of the altar. And this is where there was a fire, and they burnt the various sacrifices that had to be burnt, or the parts of the sacrifice that had to be burnt, the various vessels that are described in very intricate detail as well, that they would use. So it was impossible to go through all the intricate details that we have in the portion relating to the implements and the vessels and the dimensions of the walls, etc. But you can look in your Chumash, in some of the back of the stone edition Chumashim and Shabbos, from whence I've taken some of these pictures. You were able to look and see the pictures of the verses that describe the implements. But let's move on to some inspirational life messages, because we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the technical details of it. But what are messages that we can derive from this whole construct of a sanctuary, a home for God, making a home for God in the desert, and its relevance to our lives? Let's go through some of the messages that we can take. The first interesting debate between classic sources is when was the actual sanctuary built? When did the instruction come to build? And there's a whole variety. The verse says, speak to the children of Israel that they should take to me a teruma, which means an uplifting donation, but it's called an uplifting, and they will build for me a sanctuary. When did this instruction come? So the Zohar, first opinion I'm quoting, says it was after Sinai, before the golden calf. So we know that we came out of Egypt. We went 40 days until 49 days until we received the Torah at Sinai. The Zohar says that after Sinai, we received the Torah, but before we sinned with the golden calf, God told us to build a sanctuary. That's the first opinion we're quoting. The second opinion is from the Midrash Tanchuma, that everything came after Yom Kippur. Right at the end, we had the experience at Sinai. We then sinned with the golden calf. We then had a whole series of 40 days. And on the day of Yom Kippur, Moses came down with the second set of tablets. And according to the Midrash, it was then that God told us to build the Mishkan. Because we don't have a date that God speaks to Moses to build the sanctuary. So that we have two opinions so far. The Zohar saying it all happened before the golden calf. The Midrash Tanchuma says it all happened after the golden calf. And now we got a middle, the Ramban, Nachmanides. We're going back 900 years approximately. And he says that it was commanded before the golden calf. And Moshe communicated it after the golden calf. And the Rebbe explains that each of these periods would define the Jewish people and the nation of Am Yisrael in different terms. Because the Zohar says that it all happened after Sinai, before the golden calf. What was the state of the Jews at that time? We were tzaddikim, we were righteous. We just experienced Sinai. We were holy of holies. We were crowned with all these wonderful crowns of Hashem, because we were listening and we were ready to receive the Torah. And at the high point, when everything was so perfect, God said, oh, build for me a sanctuary and I will dwell in it. That would be the status and the state of the Jewish people according to the Zohar. The Midrash Tanchuma comes along and said, no, that's not when it happened. It happened after they sinned and after they were forgiven. When God sent down the second tablets, after Yom Kippur, that's when it happened. So the state of the Jewish people, according to this explanation, was they weren't tzaddikim, they had sinned. They were baalei teshuvah. They had repented and fixed their mistake. I just want to finish the point and I'll come to you now, Jeff. So the state of the Jewish people was that they were baalei teshuvah. They had fallen and risen again by fixing the mistake. Now comes the Ramban, and he says it was given before the commandment came before the golden calf, but when did Moshe actually instruct the Jewish people? After the golden calf, before they had repented. What was the state of the Jewish people? We were sinners. We were in the worst situation. We had sinned, and Moses said, as we had sinned after the golden calf, he came and he said, I want to tell you that Hashem told me that we have to build a sanctuary, and I'm giving it to you, this job. To who? To a Jewish people that were filled with sinners, that had done this terrible mistake of dancing around the golden calf. So we actually see that these three different opinions as to when they were commanded to build a sanctuary refer to different Jews, different in their status, maybe the same Jews, but totally different frame of reference, frame of mind, a different state of being. If it's according to the Zohar, Moshe Rabbeinu was talking to tzaddikim that hadn't fallen, that hadn't made any mistake, that hadn't yet danced around the golden calf. He gave the mission to the righteous. According to the Midrash, he gave it much, much later after they'd done tshuva. So the mission of building God's home was to the Baal Tshuva, to the person who had fallen and lifted himself. And then comes the Ramban, and he says, miraculously, masterfully, that Hashem gave the commandment beforehand, but Moshe Rabbeinu presented this commandment when we were sinners. And all of this tells us what? Often we think, who's going to build a house for Hashem? Who's capable of doing something that could make Hashem feel his presence better in the world? The righteous. Let's leave it up to the tzaddikim. Those holy people, they can build the house for Hashem, not me. I'm like an average person, but the tzaddikim, the holy, exceptional rabbis, the kohanim, whoever it is, they will build the sanctuary for Hashem because it's meant for the tzaddikim. Comes the Midrash and says, no. The Baal Tshuva, the person who sinned and picked himself up, he can build the Mishkan. In fact, he might have even greater strengths because he's fallen and he's lifted himself up. And therefore, he has a capacity to build that might be beyond the ability of the tzaddik. Comes the third opinion, the Ramban, and says, you know who Moshe Rabbeinu was talking to? The sinners. Don't write yourself off. Don't say, how can I? Who am I to build the sanctuary for Hashem? We all, whether we've made mistakes, whether we fixed the mistakes yet, whether we haven't yet made a mistake, whether we are totally on top of our game, whether we're broken by having failed, that doesn't mean that we do not have a chance to build the sanctuary of Hashem. Sorry, Jeff, you were going to say?
Yeah, when the Jewish people crossed the sea, there was a dilation, and Moses sang, and in the song it says, I don't know whether it says, we or I will build you a sanctuary.
It says there that I will praise you, this is my God, I will glorify him. But it doesn't actually say that I will build you a sanctuary. It says that I will appreciate, I will sing.
Every time I read this, I said to myself, I'll build a sanctuary. I'm sure I saw that.
Maybe
you see that?
Maybe you'll look again. Afterwards, maybe let's just look at the Siddur.
Yeah.
But the Jewish people are saying we appreciate, Jeff was saying when we crossed the sea and God did a miracle for us, we appreciated it and we sang and we committed ourselves to build a sanctuary for Hashem. We definitely wanted to praise and thank Hashem, but it came from God and he said, I want you to take matter, physical matter, and form it into a way that makes my presence manifest. I use different words that makes God feel at home. Sometimes God walks into a chamber of our lives and says, whoops, I don't feel so at home over here. No. How did this wealth get accumulated? Through theft, God forbid. Through hurting another person's feelings. Is this the house where you can't find a kosher piece of food? God that walks into the home and he's not feeling so comfortable. He's not feeling at home. So the concept of building a sanctuary, as we will soon see, was not only then in the desert, and yeah, we're arguing, was it the righteous Jews, was it the repentant Jews, or was it the sinner Jews? And each of them have an opinion putting that forward. Let's talk about us today. So, the strange wording is, the yikhu li truma, take for me, the literal words is, take for me a contribution or an uplifting of your wealth to the sanctuary. So the strangest word is take. Normally, I wouldn't come to you and say, I want you to take a donation to me. I need a donation. Please take a donation for me. It would be absurd. You're not taking, you're giving. I'd be asking you, please give a donation. So the instruction should have been, the yitnu, and they will give for me the wealth that will make a sanctuary. Why does it say they will take? It's the wrong verb. They're not taking, they're giving. So we actually see, and we've used this many times, this theme, that who gains more through the act of giving? When we are when we are virtuous and we are caring and we are giving charity, who gains more? The recipient of our charity or the giver who's giving? And interestingly enough, counterintuitively, the Torah keeps saying that the person who gives is gaining more. And we have an interesting palindrome for the Hebrew word for the plural instruction, and they will give. V'natnu. V'natnu can be read from left to right, as we do from right to left, as we read all Hebrew words, but it could equally be read from left to right. It's a palindrome. You can read the word from left to right and from right to left. Because when you give, there is two-way traffic. There's the receiver receiving from you, so happy to get from you, and there is you giving, but actually receiving the aura and the energy and the addition in life that comes with giving. So I'm just referring to a very interesting piece of art that is in the Watts, in the Tate Museum, by Watts, the artist, and it's a whole very intricate picture about a beer covered, draped over with material, and the inscription on the side is "Si transit gloria mundi." Not that my Italian is anything to write home about, but what it means is, so passes the glory of man. And then it had the additional words on each side. Interesting painting. What I spent, I had. What I kept, I lost. And what I gave, I have. So this is an artist depicting the person who's passed on from this world saying, what I spent, so I had the benefit. I spent a lot of money on food or on vacations or on travel. So I had. What I kept, I was too stingy to use the money for anything. In the end, I lost. Because what? I leave this world, I take nothing with me. But what I gave, I have. That says the departed soul, that stays with me forever. So it's a very Jewish concept, that. For me, so we should have in mind that when we are giving, we're giving it for the sake of Hashem. Many commandments, we're not obligated to specifically give it, having in mind, I am giving it for the sake of Hashem. But here, when we're wanting to elevate the gold and the copper and the silver, and according to the opinion that it came after we worship the golden calf, it's very interesting that God said, following the misuse, abuse of gold to make an idol in place of God, you would have thought God would have said, don't touch gold ever again, throw it out. Look what gold brought you to make a golden calf, and that's what you bow down to, distracted from God. But that wasn't the answer. That's too easy an answer. Yeah, you made a problem with gold. Gold is the problem. Throw it out. Gold wasn't the problem. When we say money is the root of all evil, we don't believe that money is the root of all evil. A lot of evil can come from money, and so much good. So it depends how we use it. So if we use it to uplift others, then it has a growth and a development. It's elevated. And if, God forbid, we abuse wealth, then it's nothing. So we have a possibility of elevating the physical to a higher purpose. So we gave a title to this class that we're talking about, making God feel at home. So they will make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell amongst them. So the Midrash says that Hashem desired a dwelling place in the lower realms. Hashem wanted a dira b'tachtoni. God is everywhere, up, down, right, left, and all around, everywhere. But Hashem specifically chose an operating system in this world where he concealed himself and made a beautiful world with people, with choices. And he said, now you make this world appropriate for my presence. And that was the ultimate place that God wanted to dwell. It was great amongst the angels. It's good. There's good music there and there's no trouble and everyone's doing the right thing. But in this world, when we make for God a sanctuary, when we choose to use gold for this rather than for that, when we choose to be honest in our business practices, to help and to lift others, when we are kind, when we behave and make this world a better place, we create an environment for God in the lowliest of worlds, which was his ultimate purpose. As the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneur Zalman says in Tanya, this is what man is all about. This is what you and I have to do. This is our job. This is the purpose of our creation and of the creation of all the worlds. God made angels, not for the angels' sake. Ultimately, the reason why angels came into the being was so that he would ultimately create lower angels and lower and lower and lower until eventually you'd have a world that would appear to be detached from God, where we'd have to actually look to see if we can find God. And that's where God wanted to be. that there be made for God a dwelling place in this lowest of worlds. This is where God put his eye and his attention. So there's something unique and special here, higher than heaven, than angels, than all wonderful spiritual beings. This is the realm. In this world, when we are physical beings and we use our energy and our wealth and our abilities to serve a higher purpose, that's where God feels most at home. More at home than he's wandering around with all the angels. The Shalom HaKodesh, it has many beautiful mystical teachings. He says that the operative word over here is, they will make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell in them. It should say, make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell in it. I'll dwell in the sanctuary. Why does he say I'll dwell in them? Who's the them? He says the verse does not say I'll dwell within it, the sanctuary, but I'll dwell within them, the builders of the sanctuary, within each and every one of them. So God said, yeah, build me a sanctuary, the one that we saw pictures of, in the desert then there was a temple in Jerusalem, yeah, God wanted that place. But God said, make for me a sanctuary, build me a temple, and I will dwell in them, in the builders, in you and me, in every human being who has a capacity to serve Hashem and take material and materialism and use it for the furthering of the purpose of God's creation. That's what God wanted. So I will dwell in them means that each and every one of us is charged with making a sanctuary. Well, we're not going into the desert and we're not building specific menorahs of proportions and gold and so all of those things, but we are builders. We build an environment, we build a home, and the decisions we make in that home, what comes into the home, how we utilize the space in that home, what is the amount of connection to Torah and to its values, all of those things create the environment of our home, and that could be a sanctuary for God. He didn't only dwell in the sanctuary in the desert or in Jerusalem. He dwells in them. In them means the builders, you and I and every one of us. When we wake up in the morning and we're committed to making this world a better place and we're doing something to achieve that goal, we are a sanctuary of Hashem. That's what God wanted. It's going to be hard to do everything, but I'm just giving an example where some of the measurement issues, like in the ark, every single one of the dimensions ended in a half. 2.5 cubits will be the length, a cubit and a half its breadth, and a cubit and a half its height. Very often when God gives us measurements, they're whole measurements. Why half? So Rabbi Nosson Adler says that the measurements of the ark were all in fractions, parts, to indicate that to become a vessel for the Torah, a person must first break his ego. We don't come to hold the Torah when we're whole. When we are seeing ourselves as incomplete, half beings, beings that need to develop, when there is a fraction that needs to be filled and completed, that's the process of receiving the Torah. If we come smug, feeling complete, everything is whole, so the broken numbers, half, is to tell us that when we are less than whole, we are actually good vessels to receive the Torah. And the Pardes says that the measurements of the ark were all in halves indicate that no matter how much one studies Torah, we never master it all. So he's saying even in the Torah itself, don't ever think you know it all. Even in a particular subject, there's always more to learn. So the half is indicating that we are growing and we're developing. I want to just try to move through some of these themes very quickly. So we had this recurring theme of the table, the ark, the beams that made up the outer walls of the sanctuary. They were all made of gold and wood and gold. The Talmud in the tractate of Yoma, which talks about Yom Kippur, it says that any scholar whose interior is not like his exterior is not a Torah scholar. So he's saying it's very important that the gold was on the outside and the gold was on the inside, because the message that we're getting from that is make sure that you are on the outside as you are on the inside, and the inside you are on the outside. Sometimes we're inside out, but we should always know that we don't have two worlds. Sometimes people are very frum and very religious or very kind or very giving when they're on the street and people are watching them. But if you interview their wife or their husband at home, and they'll tell you that behind closed walls doesn't behave so nicely, not so kind. Make sure your kindness is to the streets and to outside, yes, and make sure it's equally on the inside. Sometimes it's the reverse. We're very pious on the inside. You say, I'm happy to be a Jew on the inside when I'm home, when it's all private. But to take my Judaism outwards and put tefillin on an aeroplane when there's 400 very important people watching me, how am I going to do that? How will I face these people? There was once a visiting Rabbi Lu, who came to South Africa, and he spoke to the school when I was a little kid. And he told the story how he had to stand up on a train all the way from Manchester to London, maybe it's going, and it was the time to put on tefillin. So he put on tefillin, and everyone was watching. The English get uncomfortable about very little things, and here the guy was putting straps around his arm and his head, and this was too much for the people that were just trying to act prim and proper. You sit in your place and you do your thing, and here was a guy acting mad. So somebody, when they got off the train after he'd finished, said, how did you have the guts to stand up in front of so many hundreds of people and just act as if nobody was watching? He said, I made a calculation that all these people watching, when they get off the train, when's the next time they're going to matter in my life? They're going to think of me. What connection do they have to me? Is there anything I'm going to be lacking if they walk into the sunset and never look and see and think of me ever again, which is probably what's going to happen. On the other hand, I'm standing there amongst all these 500 people in front of Hashem, who's going to be here tomorrow and next week. And please God, next year. I'm in the presence of Hashem all the time. So what was am I going to act in the presence of Hashem or in front of the presence of people that I'm not buried? And often when I put on tefillin, I think about, well, at this point, that's not even a question. Not should I or shouldn't I. Obviously, it's time to put on tefillin. But that we have the confidence and that our inside values do not change when we walk outside the home. So our inside should be like our outside, and our outside should be like our inside. And that is the theme of the gold on the inside of the wood and on the outside, that we are the same on the inside and the outside. There was a certain yeshiva that goes back to the Talmudic times where they said that they would only accept into that yeshiva students who were on the inside exactly as they were on the outside. It's not making impressions and not fickle and not. But another theme of this wood and gold, and it seems like this is where we're getting up to, but we'll carry on with some of these things because we've got another whole week next week talking about the clothing and the symbolism of the clothing of the Kohanim. And then as we actually built the sanctuary, we revised all of these concepts. So whatever we didn't cover now, we'll cover in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time. So one final point. It is made of wood and gold. And it has been pointed out that these two commodities are very different. Gold is absolute, unchanging. Gold. They found gold coins from underneath the ocean that were part of a shipwreck that sank maybe 1,000 years ago, Roman times. And the gold coins, they were looking a little bit rusted over. You take the right material, you shine them up, and they can look exactly as they looked when they were created. Gold has an incredible resilience. Gold is the absolute. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and it's there today and it's there tomorrow. What's lacking in gold? What's in the wood that the gold doesn't have? Wood represents the realm of the foliage of the world, the trees of the world, the forests of the world. There you have a capacity to have tomorrow more than you have today. Gold is what it is, unchanging, you won't lose, but you also can't look at this gold coin and say, I'm going to plant it in the ground, and tomorrow I'm going to have 2 gold coins. We'd love to think that that could happen, it doesn't happen. A tree you plant, and tomorrow there's another tree, and then there's another tree, and then there's seeds, and there's a forest, and suddenly you grow. So the wood represents the dynamism of the forest, the growth, the development, the creativity, the change, that every single day is a new day, a different day, more than yesterday, not nearly as much as tomorrow. So we see that the framework of Judaism is the absolutes of our values. There you don't mess. There you don't say 22. So it's not 613 commandments, maybe it's 612 or 512. So today we've got to make a rearrangement. We can't, it's got the framework, the inside and the outside is gold. That's what defines. Absolute, not changing. The values of 2,000 years, 3,000, 5,000 years ago is exactly the same values of today. But while we're holding on to the absolute, unchanging, we have wood. And the wood represents the realm in this world that is dynamic and that grows and develops, and that we're not limited to wake up tomorrow morning and say, I'm a clone of what was yesterday. And the next day, I'll be a clone of what I am today. The same, repeated, absolute, same individual, without any new enthusiasm, excitement, development, goals, growth. So the wood and the gold really represent the capacity to retain the absolutes where we do not change, and to know when it is that we have to be so changing, so developing from within to ensure that those absolutes are relevant to our generation, to our time. The values don't change, but the process has to be dynamic. So we are at the 8 o'clock hour, so we have to end off. But as I said, the next week's coming up, we're going to have a chance to talk about the sanctuary again. So please stand by, and whatever we haven't covered from today's shir will be covered in the weeks to come. Have a magnificent, beautiful Shabbos. And let me close this.
Chodesh Adar.
Nice to hear from you. Nice to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for
Shabbat
being
Shalom. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shalom. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
How do you press?
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
I think I pressed the other.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I think I pressed the wrong button.
As long as you don't press the button that causes something to explode, Alan.
Well, you're right.
Keep us safe.
Yeah, be well.
God bless.
Yeah, please go to you, buddy. Okay.
Hi, Joy. I didn't see you before. Barry, welcome. Nice to have you with us. Thank you for joining.